Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Crysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey everybody, thanks for joining another episode of the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. Today I'm excited to be welcoming Sagar Pandya to the podcast. Sagar is a founder, AI strategist, and cyber expert who has spent his career helping companies modernize their technology. After selling his IT and cybersecurity company, he launched Spedge AI to help organizations adopt AI with confidence, clarity, and real-world results. Sagar, awesome to have you on the podcast today, man. Thanks for joining.
Dave, it's always a pleasure to jump on a call with one of my favorite people right now and just talk about the world and how we view things and just the exciting stuff that's going to happen in 2026.
Yeah, man. It's been fun getting to know you. I think, lots of folks obviously are talking about AI. It's all the rage these days, as the kids are saying, right? And I think the thing that we align so much on is, the culture piece, how this stuff really happens. And, I just saw a post yesterday trying to introduce this new thought process around, why AI is successful or fails. And, they were trying to, kind of coin a new term, if you will. But, it comes down to change management. It comes down to culture, to people, how we're talking about change, how we're introducing tools. And so I thought that'd be like a great place to kind of kick off the conversation with some of, what you've seen, like real world case studies, how people are thinking about in the conversations you're having, how people are thinking about the AI landscape today and how to kick off some of these initial conversations with their team, right?
So we, right now, as of this recording in January of 2026, we are now in a place in society where I would say the vast majority of people that are using computers for most of their daily work have heard of tools like ChatGPT. Or if you're, more of an AI savvy person, maybe Google Gemini or Anthropic's Claude, right? So we live now in a place where most people know what ChatGPT is. They've tried it. They've done a couple of prompts. They've been using it maybe to look up recipes or build their soccer schedule for their kids' school, summer league, or some aspect of their daily life. And organizations have also started utilizing it, right? I'd argue that, smaller and mid-sized companies more so than the large enterprises, just because it's harder to deploy any change in large enterprise because of all the hoops you have to jump through.
Yeah.
So the conversations that I've had the opportunity to have had seriously since mid 2022, so almost 3.5 years, almost 4 years now, has shifted from, hey, this AI thing is pretty interesting, but we're going to wait and see what happens to competitors in our industry so that we can learn from the mistakes that they make. That was the conversation we were having 2022, 2023. And then in 2024, when ChatGPT started getting more adoption and people started using it in their daily lives or with company data, even if the company didn't have an official policy around it, the shift went from, hey, we're going to wait and see what happens to, oh my God, we're falling behind. We need to scramble and immediately make this a priority inside of the organization. Like the velocity of that shift has been so fast, right? It's just been complete 180 where every boardroom I walk into now, there's just this AI. Everyone's talking about this. And the problem is AI has become like an umbrella term, right? A lot of the work that most folks like myself do inside of these organizations, it's not truly generative AI work where you're like training an AI model and you're building an infrastructure around it and you're creating some intelligence inside of an organization's infrastructure. That's a very small subset of the work that most folks are doing today. A large part of this AI umbrella term, Dave, is how do we build the right culture of change inside of the organization? How do we rethink how we do things? How do we change workflows? How do we put in guardrails, right? How do we address this identity crisis, which I talk about in my book that's coming out soon, on this perspective of AI taking over roles that people have spent decades acquiring knowledge in order to be able to do effectively and raise themselves, in the ranks of an organization. So as we sit today, everyone's just like got this FOMO, and they're all putting AI as a core priority for 2026. But a lot of organizations they don't know where to start. They don't know if they should buy tools. They don't know if they should do some training. They don't know if they should send their people to conferences to learn things to bring back to the organization. They don't know if they should still sit on the sidelines and just wait and see what happens. And I think there's a shortage of that North Star right now where people just don't know what to do. So it's very fascinating, just the different levels of perspectives across organizations today.
Yeah. Man, it's a great breakdown. I think you shared a ton of really insightful nuggets in there. I mean, my favorite one being just the real, the kind of reality check of the fact that a lot of this stuff is being done at the smaller sized businesses, right? And you kind of read the headlines and you think, oh my gosh, like the small companies, right, are thinking like all the big people are so far advanced. They have, these data lakes and deployed, and they're doing all these autonomous agents. And it's like, sure, some of them are doing some really cool things, but like, let's face it, right? RPA's been around for a minute. So like, let's not get too wild about, the things that we're hearing. And I think that's really insightful for folks because, there is a ton of noise in this space. There's a lot of, to your point, people, throwing out different tool sets or, terminology that does fit under this AI umbrella, and it gets confusing. I feel like I'm relatively savvy when it comes to this stuff. And sometimes I feel like I'm getting lost in what, people are trying to articulate. So I love to bring everybody back down to the ground, talk about reality, talk about things we're actually seeing in real businesses that are, starting to dabble and starting to have these conversations. So I think, a great place to take this is, one of our last conversations you and I had kind of offline outside of the podcast was around this idea of like a diagnostic tool. Right. And I think what's interesting about that is, to me, it's always a great place to start understanding what our current state is, because whether we're talking about, implementing some sort of AI tool agent scenario, or we're talking about, upgrading an ERP or a new accounting system or, CRM, right? The basics still apply. And the basics being culture, change management, planning, people, process, technology. So I think let's talk about maybe the diagnostic aspect and some of the things from a question perspective, maybe that you're challenging some of these business leaders with, to think through like what are we trying to do with this thing that's so cool, that has so many advantages. So maybe talk a bit about that.
Great question to bring up. And that's how my consulting company Spedge. That's how we approach every new organization that wants to work with us. We start with the diagnostic, and the diagnostic is essentially to avoid this retrofitting of AI becoming a guessing game inside of the organization that just has a ton of FOMO around this technology that they feel they're falling behind on. So an analogy that I can give, Dave, is, I would say most people, if not all people, they don't just drive up to a pharmacy and go to the pharmacist and say, give me the medication immediately. I know I need it. I want to get it. This is what I want. The pharmacist is going to look at you really funny and say, Where is your doctor's referral? What are you taking medication for? Why do you want it in the first place? Same thing is happening inside of organizations, but instead of it being a pharmacy and medication, it's AI tools and ChatGPT licenses.
Yeah.
So we got to always take a time out. Anytime you as an organization are ready to have this conversation around artificial intelligence, there's a few key things that are going to be very beneficial for you now to avoid any type of turmoil down the road. And in the diagnostic, the number one question we first ask is, do you have an understanding of where your data resides today? Right? Small companies may have Microsoft 365. They may be using OneDrive and SharePoint, or file servers that'll still, physical servers in the office or in their server closet. You may be using Google Workspace with Google Drive. You may be using Dropbox or Box. You may be using some other type of cloud storage. You go into like the mid-market size companies, you may start using like ERP systems. You may have other cloud tools like Salesforce or HubSpot. You may have more data residing in those places. And then more on the enterprise side, you got like massive data warehouses. You got terabytes and terabytes of data. And I will tell you, most organizations haven't got a single clue of what data they even have access to in the first place, where it resides, what it means for their organization, right? So that's the number one question is, do you know what type of data you even have in your organization? Because data is oxygen for AI. And if it's not labeled or clean or categorized in a way that AI is going to understand it, you're going to get outputs that make no sense. And that's going to stall adoption even further. So people get really frustrated. They're like, man, AI is just putting out garbage. I'm like, yeah, because you're feeding it garbage. Like, what do you expect, right?
Yeah.
So data is the number one question. The second question that I ask folks in a diagnostic is, do you have a sense on a basic level of your security hygiene in your organization? Right? Do your interns have accidental access to the executive finance folder? They just don't know it yet, but an AI system that's activated will absolutely find it for them immediately, right? Do you have the proper security safeguards for your accounts? Are you using different passwords? My previous life, I spent 15 years in cybersecurity. So those are the first questions we ask is, do you have the right security infrastructure so AI doesn't just run amok in the organization and just start accessing things that the people who had access to didn't even know about it themselves, right? And then the billion-dollar question for everybody, Dave, regardless of whether it's AI or if it's, choosing a vendor or it's deciding on a strategy or choosing a color on a logo, it doesn't matter. Is there alignment in the organization? Is everybody rowing in the same direction?
Yeah.
Doing change management is freaking hard. And if you don't have everyone that knows where they're going and the reason for it, I talk about the why also in my book. Why are we doing AI? Is it, competitive advantage to people in your industry? Is it because you want to fire all your staff and just be AI only? Do you want to cut costs and minimize COGS on your P&L, right? Do you want to increase profit margins? Do you want to look like you're tech savvy to attract talent? There are reasons. And the sooner you can get to that why, the sooner you can communicate it so that the security hygiene question and the data governance question become much easier, because then you don't have a room full of staff scratching their heads saying, Dave, why are we talking about AI in the first place? So these are the things we talk about from a diagnostic standpoint. You got to know where you're at. And it gets dangerous when you assume that your starting point as a small business is the same starting point as a Fortune 100 organization that has 1,000 times more resources, people, capabilities, right? So you got to level set. And before you spend any money on any licenses or any expensive consultants that give you a PowerPoint deck to tell you the amazing things AI can do, Dave, it's data, it's security, and it's alignment. You do those right, that's your AI strategy, and you're going to be unstoppable.
Yeah. Again, just tons of great information in there. But, the point I think I really want to reinforce for folks is that, again, looking at the data integrity, the data governance, the cybersecurity, those are foundational elements for all things that over the course of time, as businesses grow, they often kind of get taken for granted. And again, I've seen that in enterprise sized businesses that have, a tremendous IT infrastructure and staff, right? It's because of how they grow that makes them these unwieldy things that somebody has inherited that now somebody else wants to make their mark and bring in a tool set, to take advantage of all of that without understanding how all things are connected, the access that we give people unknowingly, or that, their role has changed over the course of time and we've not done an audit of those roles, from a cybersecurity perspective, right? And so you're just introducing all kinds of opportunities for really bad things to ultimately happen within your business when you go to folks that are in the marketplace. And we both know folks that do this stuff, right? But that are looking for a sale. Right? They're not looking to educate people. They're not looking to come alongside of people. They're looking for, increased revenue. And, I think it's obviously a disservice to, all of the work that's being done, because there's a lot of tremendous people that are sharing incredibly helpful information. But again, there's a lot of noise in this space specifically that people can, really get sucked down a rabbit hole and spend a lot of their resources, right? Just chasing that stuff. So I think that's good. I think, one of the other things I'm thinking through as we're prepping for the show is, you talk about, and this might be a good way to kind of to encapsulate, the bigger idea. But you talk a bit about kind of like the 3 mistakes that you've seen when you're coming into organizations, you're having these conversations, from this AI readiness perspective. Can you maybe break down what those 3 specific things are that have come up in the conversations that you've had?
Yeah, and I think the reason why what you mentioned earlier on adoption and why it's important to address these things around data security and alignment, that's the reason why you see reports come out, like the MIT report, 95% of AI pilots are failing. It's because there's this initial excitement and this FOMO around wanting to keep up that slows down an organization's ability to sustainably execute AI long-term, right? Yeah. And I think that boils down to number one is first figuring out inside of the organization what is going to be the biggest lever that you can pull that's going to allow the organization to move AI adoption forward, right? Is it going to be saving people time? Is it going to be to compete at a higher level in the industry that you're already operating in? Is it going to cut costs? What is that lever that you're going to be able to pull that gives you the quickest win so that when you do have adoption challenges, you can point to those quick wins and say, here's some progress that we're seeing. So I think that's number one. I think number two, there's this problem happening inside of organizations where leadership is not listening or communicating to the rest of their staff around this very important topic, which is change. Companies are making decisions from, I call it their ivory towers. You got the C-suite that assumes that they know exactly how the organization operates. Typically, they're the ones that are most disconnected from customers or from the way things are done. And if they're the ones making decisions, what do you think the reaction is going to be to the folks that are close to the clients or that are very close to how things actually get done, right? So there's this disconnect and this silo of communication that's not happening. And we see that often when we go into organizations. It's not just leadership alignment, like I said earlier. You also have to have a cultural alignment internally. Right? You got to have people believing that the decisions you're making as a leadership team are what's going to benefit the organization as a whole. And then I think thirdly, so many organizations that we talk to, they want to celebrate wins and success and plaster those all over the organization. Like, here's the big contract that we won. Here's this, new logo that we brought on. Here's this new innovation that we developed. Those are very far and few between. There are many more lessons learned, failures, and experimentations that do not get discussed. Yeah. So I think item number 3 is, can we talk more about the things that have gone wrong in your organization when you've done some type of implementation or some type of rollout? And how did you approach it? Was it, less ego, more transparency, more vulnerability for the leadership team? Or was it just swept under the rug because you don't want there to be a black eye on the leadership team's reputation, even though leading with vulnerability and transparency is the exact way you get adoption through things like AI change, right? So I think these are the things that organizations, they don't pay attention to. And instead, you just get AI thrown into every leadership strategy deck. You don't get the depth that you need to make the proper decisions. And then you just get sold AI licenses for ChatGPT and Copilot. You get very expensive consultants to come in just to build decks and promise the world. And then, 6 months later, you got reports from the MIT coming in saying 95% of pilots fail because they're measuring maybe the wrong thing. So it's just perpetual cycle, right? And the velocity at which AI moves, Dave, is not helping that cause. Yeah. And I got to be the guy sometimes, right? I joke. I call myself either the chief fear reduction officer or the chief slowdown officer, where I go into organizations. I want to remove this fear, this uncertainty, and this doubt around AI, right? And I talk about that in my book as well. But I'm also the guy that, if you know me personally, this is crazy for me to say, but I'm also the guy that pumps the brakes. Like, let's slow down. Like, 2-minute warning, let's pause, let's redraw the play before we run, because we're on the 12-yard line, right? Let's not throw an interception at that point. So those are the things that I think company leaders need to think about. It's not just the technical implementation and the procurement of a tool or a license. There is so much more around this successful AI implementation story that's got to happen as a prerequisite in order for there to be any semblance of sustainability 6 to 18 months in the future.
Yeah. I think hopefully the thing that people are listening to this and taking away from it is that, this is no different than any implementation, any type of change initiative, right? It all starts from that same foundational element, the things that you unpacked. I think the one thing I want to, kind of add to the conversation to have you talk a bit about, because you did this post a while ago and I didn't re-dig it up, but it was something that caught my eye specific to the conversations around change management, around leadership, kind of sharing the why, rallying the troops. But I think there's something interesting specific to the AI piece. And you wrote about this a while ago, and it was just this fact that, there's so much buzz around the tool and replacement of people. And, we no longer need, human in the loop because, AI is just so amazing, right? Blah, blah, blah. But what you wrote that caught my eye was this thought process around answering the fears as you're having these conversations with your team members, right? Like, being empathetic, showing up and understanding, like, this could be a real fear for people. So when you're, in the leadership chair saying like AI everything, people might not be cheering along with you. They might be looking at it saying like, oh my gosh, they want to get rid of me? Like, what about the 25 years I've spent here? What about the customer relationships I've developed? What about, all of these other things that I've done? So I think maybe you could talk just a bit more about that specifically, and like some of the fears you're hearing directly from, the folks doing the work, and then how you're kind of bridging that gap for some of the leadership, folks in conversations with some of the engagements you guys have been active with.
Absolutely. And I remember exactly what post you're talking about, Dave. That is the core thesis of my book, The AI Culture Blueprint, that's coming out next week as of this posting, right? Or this recording, which can be very exciting. It's the core thesis of my book, which is AI is causing a massive identity crisis inside of organizations. It's like a disease that's happening to everybody, right? And you think about why that is. Imagine you're a mid-market manufacturing organization doing a few $100 million of revenue a year, and you got a great finance team. You got a controller that's been in the role 15 years, tremendous tribal knowledge of the organization. You've gone through some acquisitions, just all this really important context of the organization. Only then to be told by their CFO, hey, Dave, done a great job. We just onboarded this new AI tool, and all the FP&A stuff and all the reporting that you've been doing, it's going to be so much easier. It's only going to take you 15 minutes a week to do this stuff. Now, as a controller who spent 15 years at this company, 10 years prior to that in a different company, and 5 years before that, you've had almost a 30-year career, right, doing this work. Yeah. To now be told that an AI tool can take over 80% of your role, what is that 30-year veteran going to think, right? They're going to be very fearful. And these headlines, while they are sensational, there's some truth to them that knowledge work is at risk because of what these AI tools are going to be able to do. And I've seen some pretty crazy stuff that's on the horizon. So there's this fear inside of organizations, which is very validated, that AI is going to come and take over all the stuff that I've spent 30 years acquiring knowledge and being able to do effectively, and all the sacrifices I've made, and all the ladder climbing I've done, and all the ass kissing I've done to get to this stage. So of course there's this fear, this uncertainty, and there's this doubt. And I think the problem with all of that is that it's rooted in naivety and ignorance in how the tools actually work. We have grown up with a generation of folks that have watched the Terminator movies, and they have the Skynet perspective baked into our brains. I can tell you, without having a crystal ball, because anything can change, we're not quite there yet. AI tools are smart, but they're still very dumb. They don't have context. They need human operators to succeed in anything, right? So I think this fear is just around not knowing how the tools actually work. How do you address these tools? How do you eliminate this FUD? How do you eliminate this hesitation that the fear creates in companies that attempt to adopt AI across the organization? It's by being human and having a conversation. I always tell my clients this concept of AI councils, where you need to do everything that you can as an organization to collect as much of this perspective and feedback about AI tool usage from all levels of your organization. What I always worry about are the organizations that strictly say no AI usage across the organization. They give no answer as to why they made that decision. And then you have a staff full of people that secretly do it on personal devices or on company devices if you don't have the right policy set up. And they're siphoning out corporate data into these large language models without any anonymization or sanitization. And you got corporate information just flying out there. Once it's out there, it's impossible to get it back. So to reduce this fear, you gotta listen and talk to people. You got to help them understand. Again, we talked earlier about the alignment, the why you want to use AI. And I have found that if we go into any client discovery or any diagnostic with a cultural component, we run anonymous surveys. Some people prefer to send it anonymously. Some people prefer to yell about it in a group setting. Others want it one-to-one. Others want to write an email. Whatever makes them comfortable. When we collect that, that is intelligence, and it tells us how aggressively we need to go down this path of AI deployments. If you got a team full of people that are scared out of their minds and they want nothing to do with AI tools, we better do some what I call AI listening tours. We better start asking questions and spend 3 months figuring out why people are so scared. And then creating a town hall or a Q&A to give them an opportunity in a safe shared space to talk about it. And then we start an AI adoption process. Or there's companies that already have a team that's very AI savvy. They're very bleeding edge. That's fantastic. Let's turn this around in 2 to 4 weeks and move fast. But if we don't have an understanding of the culture, you're just going to get resistance and hesitation. And then you're going to scratch your head and say, we spent all this money, but we only got 7% of users that are using this tool. Yeah, because they're all afraid that if they use the tool, the 30-year veteran who's your controller is fearing for their life and their job security. So we got to address it by just having conversations. But unfortunately, Dave, what happens is because of the velocity at which this is moving, because of all the FOMO that's out there, that gets swept under the rug.
Yeah.
It's not prioritized, and it becomes a brute force activity that then shows up. Again, I reference this MIT research. If you haven't seen it, go look it up. It shows up as a 95% adoption failure because organizations did not ask the right questions.
Yeah. I will look up that study because I haven't seen it, and somebody called me out. This happened a few months ago, but somebody called me out for citing some old Big Four reports around, a 75+% technology adoption failure rate. And I said, well, you can read the paper, but beyond that, I have lived experience and I know what happens in these organizations. And I think like what you were unpacking there, again, really gets back to this idea of that I love, by the way, right? Slowing down to speed up. And it sounds counterintuitive. Nobody wants to hear. It's the most unpopular thing to say. Like I joke, right? I generally get paid to tell people things they don't want to hear, right? and it's because, of that lived experience. And I know you have the same, right? It's because of your cybersecurity background that you're asking these questions about, data hygiene and integrity and connectivity and, security risks across an organization. And again, once you start getting out of that SMB world and into mid-market and enterprise where you've got, thousands of employees, you've got, tens of thousands of, devices, terminals, right? Patch cables, the like, data points, lines of code, however you want to measure it, right? It's wild. And, exponential risks to potentially navigate. So I think the idea of slowing down to speed up, having a lot more thoughtful conversations. The other thing I want to, talk about, and I think it kind of, rolls into this idea, but, beyond the diagnostic, beyond the slow down to speed up, I want to talk a bit about, kind of proof of concept with a lot of these tools, because I think that's another point in the process that we can use to to emphasize the slow down to speed up and ultimately get a bit more adoption, because we're really diving in. We're really understanding how are we measuring this thing? What are we even doing to begin with, right? So maybe, I don't know if you can, but if you can, talk a bit about maybe some of the proof of concept stuff that you guys are having conversation around, or maybe that you've been able to deploy, and maybe not specifics about what it was, but the culture piece of it, what it was like to get to that point, and then maybe some of the result in terms of rolling forward with a larger scale test, or kind of what the next steps of that look like.
Yeah, absolutely happy to share. So post-diagnostic, right? If we first figure out, hey, this company is ready to be AI-ified, right? And that's an understanding of data governance, some semblance of a basic security posture, and generally good alignment in the leadership team, right? If that's all thumbs up across the board, some of the things, Dave, that we're seeing first and foremost are implementing chatbots inside of organizations. This concept of being able to talk to your data, right? The challenge with tools like challenge and benefits. The challenge of tools like ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, these consumer productivity AI tools, are that they don't necessarily have context across the entire organization, right? So ChatGPT typically is an individual one-to-one conversation. They do have some group text, group messaging and sharing capabilities recently, which are still, I think, maturing. But these tools don't have context to everything in the organization unless you upload it, right? You upload an attachment, or you connect the MCP for Google Drive or for your Outlook 365 mailbox after IT gives you a green light or approval for it. So that's the challenge with these tools, is they don't have all the context of the organization. You have to feed it. So it's only as good as the information that it knows. Some of the benefits of these tools are they make it pretty easy to then upload information. Doesn't require a lot of configuration, which can also be dangerous if you have unfettered access to places that have no guardrails. So number one, I think, is this concept of chatting with your data. Can a controller at a mid-market manufacturing firm ask in natural language, in English, right? What are the trends that you're seeing on our financials, and what are some areas of risk that we have not considered uncovering? And if AI has access to these pieces of information, it can then find things for you at scale. Right. So chatbots and searching at scale are absolutely number one. I think number two is executing basic tasks that are client facing. Right? How do we respond to customers in a customer service inquiry? How do we capture information so that it could be passed on to a human operator to then take action? Really, these low-level, repetitive, mundane tasks that were generally, right? You got to be careful. It was generally staffed by people that are just entering their careers. The reality is now these machines are able to do this job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's like the bottom level: chat interfaces, chatting with your data, talking to customers, and just doing some data collection. That's like on a base level. If you think like on a mid-tier level, how can we give the organization the ability to build some type of intelligence about stuff that it does on a repeatable basis so that the AI can then tell you how to execute and make decisions? So one of the organizations we're working with, they onboard a ton of new vendors every year, in the hundreds, right? And those vendors have to go through pretty strict security auditing process. The problem is, the auditing process is very cumbersome, and it requires very expensive and very, very experienced security people to make decisions. And the challenge is each of those security folks subjectively make decisions differently than one another. So the vendor that comes in that gets audited, it kind of depends on whose desk it lands on in order to see the end result. And the problem is, security threats and threat actors are changing. How do the security practitioners at this organization stay up to date with the latest and greatest in security defense capabilities while also holding their vendors true to that standard? So building some type of intelligence to say, okay, we as an organization, when we onboard vendors, here's what we expect. We expect them to have these 7 things. And it just walks through a more standardized process at scale so that these security practitioners at this organization now no longer have to spend all their time looking at questionnaires and just vetting. They make judgment calls and decisions, right? And they minimize risk at a higher level. So that's like mid-tier stuff. How do we create intelligence around stuff that's happening in our organization on a very frequent basis, right?
That's a great example. Yeah, that's a really, really solid example of, not just providing value at the level you're kind of removing tasks, right? But my mind naturally goes to then again, and you kind of made the point briefly, but now what can we do with their talent, right? Like we remove the mundane, task management from them, which guarantee they hate anyway, right? Like guarantee it, right? And now we move them into a proactive situation where we can take and test. Right. Like, so great. We've built something that aggregates this information, allows us to see, additional visibility and improve it at, a much faster rate. But then beyond that, we now take our talent pool and we don't displace them. We create a more proactive scenario where now we are, improving exponentially. Right. Yep. So, and whatever that means in that particular organization, right? That could be customer facing, could be internal optimization, but that now is the stuff that unlocks, some real differentiators and, differences for that org. So that's cool.
That elevation, so I call that the walking with AI, the chatbots and the searching of data, that's the crawling with AI. I'm going to share with you an example of running and flying with AI. But this example of elevating people, Dave, from security practitioner that's vetting vendors and just going through security auditing process, and instead now they're responsible for risk decisions to actually mitigate the risk and actively monitor versus doing mundane, repetitive work. That difference, right? Like that savings is not generating an invoice that you can clearly see on a financial statement. And that's where, I would argue these MIT reports and just some folks that talk about adoption failures, they're not measuring that savings of time there, right? It's not necessarily captured anyway. It's not quantified to know that security practitioner went from auditing results to managing risk. You can't quantify that. So that's all I wanted to make a point. There's no invoice generated. It's hard to see it. I think the companies that run and fly with AI, here's one example, working with a large transportation and logistics company, and we are building them route optimization based on very particular supply chains that they work in right now. So their challenge is they're intermodal company. They do transport of trucks. They do air, land, and sea, right? Transportation to get places across Earth. The challenge is there are so many variables that they have to think about when they price how they're going to transport and the expectations, right? So weather, right? Like they never took into account weather conditions of where this truck may go down a path. They may slow down and cost more fuel. There might be restrictions and travel delays and predictions of flight issues at airports when things happen. There may be stuff maritime that happens on sea because of waves and just other things that happen. There may be events happening across the globe. Right? Yeah, there's things that are happening. So their problem was when they priced things, they never took in those external factors into account. So having an engine internally that can crowdsource external variables to then influence not only their internal trucking, plane, or ship capacity, and what type of product they're shipping, how soon the manufacturer can get them the raw materials, and how quickly the client can accept it. And there's so many variables that happen. It's a very intricate process. So how do you build where essentially it's a pricing engine that can take external variables? This is beyond this security auditing where it's all internal. Now we're opening up externally, looking at sunrises and sunsets and waves and where the moon is and snowy conditions and airspeed and strikes and people and just all these things that humans, we have no capability to do it at scale. You'd have to have tens of thousands of people, which is just cost prohibitive. So how do we then take that at scale and plug that into the folks that are the brokers and the price people and help them make better pricing decisions so that leadership team at that transportation company can confidently tell shareholders, hey, we're able to maintain certain EBITDA margins and enterprise value because we can very confidently and very accurately price our loads very, very closely to what is going to actually happen because we've taken into consideration a myriad of other variables outside that we traditionally just did not have the capability to scale. That's running with AI. Like, how do we get all that information? And then the use cases from there, I mean, Dave, it's limitless. We could spend 6 hours talking about what most organizations can do. That's just scratching the surface, right? So I'm like very bullish on where we're going to be 12 months from now, where we're going to be 24 months from now with, agentic and just automation. That's what we're seeing. But none of this stuff is possible if you don't have an understanding of where your data resides. You don't have a clear boundary of your security posture. And if you don't have alignment in a leadership team, good luck trying to get any semblance of adoption because you're going to be rowing in 17 different directions.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way to, start to wind this thing up. And to your point, yes, we could certainly go into a myriad of, things that we've seen. I loved your examples. There is so much excitement around the ability to do things that, to your point, we've not had the people power to be able to produce that output. Right. That is super exciting. Again, to your point, without having the right foundation, it's a literal house of cards. And I do believe over the next, whether it's 6, 18, months or 5 years from now, I do think that we will see businesses implode from adoption and failed implementation initiatives because they don't understand the infrastructure of change. They don't understand where their data resides, who has access to it and when, and how to again, to your point, put guardrails and boundaries around those things. So I do think we're in the early stages of seeing really bad things happen. And I completely agree that we are in the very, very early stages of seeing some incredible things happen and some consolidation happen because of it. I think we'll see some smaller companies emerge and eat the lunch of some larger companies because they can't navigate as quickly. And I say this is like the coolest time to be alive, to see this stuff come to fruition, to get to chat meet with people like yourself that are really immersed in this stuff. I think maybe just to, wind things down, hard to believe we've already gone for almost 45 minutes already. But what, if you had to say, one thing, right? You had to tell an ops leader that was coming to you and saying, Sagar, where do we start? What do we do? How should I be thinking about this going into 2026? What's the thing you tell them at a cocktail party, in 2 minutes or less?
I know this is scary for lots of leaders that are probably listening to this, but the answer to that question, talk to your employees. Ask them. They know the answers. Your entire AI strategy exists inside of your organization, in the minds of your staff. So get everybody, whether it's virtual or in a conference room, order some lunch and create a safe space where people can admittedly raise their hand to say, yeah, Dave, I've been secretly using AI for 6 months. Here's what I've built. And then elevate that person, give them an AI champion title, compensate them for the extra time they're going to put them, give them a medal every month, because that person or those people are going to be the difference on whether your company survives this next 5 to 10 years or gets your lunch eaten, because scale and resources are no longer the moat in the era we live in right now. 5-person organizations can compete very quickly with those that are 500 and even 5,000. So talk to your employees, ask them questions, be vulnerable, leave your ego at the door. Tell them you don't know what the hell's going on, and let them help you, and watch the magic unfold.
Yeah, man. I love that, especially at the end. Ultimately, lots of folks in the leadership seats are worried about doing that stuff because they are so far removed from it, even if they grew up in it, right? It's been a minute since they've been out there. And so I think, just to your point, owning that and saying, guys, I don't know what, I don't know where this is going to take us, what we're doing. I bet there's some folks in this room already using these tools. I'd love to hear about them. If you don't feel comfortable here, let's have a one-to-one, right? But owning what's happened, right? Like, maybe I'm not out and on the floor like I should be. Maybe I'm not having these conversations. Just own that, right? And then ask for help, because people are willing to do that. People are willing to share stories. I've seen it in 5-person organizations. I've seen it in, 15,000 person organizations, but it all comes down to how you approach it, what you're willing to own, and to, again, check your ego at the door when you sit in that leadership role. Sagar, man, amazing conversation. For the folks that want to reach out to you, and I'll make sure to put this in the show notes, where's the best place for people to connect with you at?
I live on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn handle, hey, Sagar Pandya, look me up. You'll see me yelling about AI every single day. Best and easiest way to get in touch with me is LinkedIn.
I love it, man. Well, thanks for taking your time today. It's been an awesome conversation, and look forward to an exciting 2026.
Appreciate it, Dave. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Crysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Crysler.